"Father, I've been stealing babies and selling them to church families," she confessed through tears. My priestly vows demanded silence, but when her list of victims revealed a truth that shattered my own world, I learned that sometimes divine providence works through the most broken confessions. The rain drummed against the stained glass windows of St. Rose Parish that Thursday evening, each droplet catching the amber light from the sanctuary lamps like tears of heaven itself. I had been preparing to lock the confessional when I heard the heavy oak door creak open behind me. After 15 years serving this congregation, I'd learned to recognize the footsteps of my parishioners, but these were different, hesitant, burdened. My name is Father Michael O'Connor, and I've dedicated my life to shepherding the souls of Milford's faithful. This small Connecticut town has been my calling, my home, my sacred responsibility since I first took my vows. Our parish isn't grand like the cathedrals in Hartford, but it pulses with genuine faith. Here, neighbors know neighbors, children grow up in the same pews their grandparents once occupied, and confession still means something. That evening felt different, though. The air itself seemed heavy with unspoken words, as if the very walls of our sanctuary were holding their breath. I turned toward the confessional, offering a silent prayer for wisdom. Lord, grant me the grace to listen with your heart and speak with your compassion. Father? The voice belonged to Eleanor Harrison, though it took me a moment to recognize it. Eleanor, who had been the backbone of our adoption ministry for nearly 2 decades. Eleanor, whose generous heart had helped place dozens of children with loving families. Eleanor, whose very presence usually radiated the confidence of someone walking in God's will. But not tonight. Mrs. Harrison? I settled into the priest's side of the confessional, my heart already sensing the weight of what was to come. What brings you here so late? Through the screen, I could see her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. At 72, Eleanor had always possessed an almost regal bearing, her silver hair perfectly styled, her faith unwavering. Now she appeared fragile, like parchment ready to crumble at the slightest touch. Father, I need to cleanse my soul before I meet my Maker. Her voice cracked on the words. The doctors, they've given me 2 months, maybe 3. The cancer has spread. My pastoral heart immediately reached out to comfort her, but something in her tone stopped me cold. This wasn't the voice of someone seeking peace in their final days. This was the voice of someone carrying an unspeakable burden. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. We'll face this together, as a church family. No. The word cut through the sacred space like a blade. You don't understand, Father, what I've done, what I've been doing. God help me, I've been living a lie for years. The sanctuary lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across the confessional screen. I found myself praying for strength, remembering the words of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. I'm listening, my child. She took a shuddering breath, and I heard the rustle of papers. Our adoption ministry, Father, the work I've been so proud of, the families I've helped. Another pause, longer this time. I've been selling babies. For years, taking them from their birth mothers and selling them to families who could pay. The words hung in the air like incense turned bitter. I felt my throat constrict, my hands instinctively gripping the prayer book in my lap. Eleanor, surely you don't mean... I mean exactly what I said. Her voice gained strength, as if speaking the truth had unleashed something within her. Doctors would tell young mothers their babies died during childbirth. We'd falsified death certificates. Meanwhile, desperate families paid me thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, for those same children. My mind reeled. The adoption ministry had been our parish's crown jewel, a testament to our commitment to protecting life and building families. The thought that it had been corrupted into something so heinous made my stomach turn. The families who participated, she continued, and I heard papers rustling again. I kept records, Father, names, dates, amounts paid. I need to give you this list before... Eleanor, please, think carefully about what you're telling me. The seal of confession. I know what I'm asking. Her voice cut through my protest. But I can't face judgment with this on my soul. The Thompson family, little Ethan they adopted 5 years ago, the Wilsons, Emma 3 years ago, the Rodriguezes, the Clarks, each name felt like a physical blow. These were pillars of our community, families I'd watched grow and flourish, families I'd celebrated with when their adoptions were finalized. And Father, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, the O'Connor family. Time stopped. The very air in the confessional seemed to freeze. My blood turned to ice water in my veins as my mind raced to process what she'd just said. O'Connor, my name, my family. Eleanor, what are you saying? Your daughter, Lily, Father, 7 years ago, your wife, Margaret, she paid me $75,000. The prayer book slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a sound that echoed like thunder in the small space. Lily, my precious, beautiful 7-year-old daughter, the child Margaret and I had welcomed after 10 years of heartbreak and infertility, the little girl who had healed our marriage and filled our home with laughter. That's impossible, I whispered, but even as the words left my lips, fragments of memory began surfacing. Margaret's insistence on handling all the paperwork, the unusually quick processing time, her nervousness during those weeks, the way she'd discouraged me from asking too many questions about the birth mother. I'm so sorry, Father, so very sorry. Eleanor's sobs echoed through the screen. I told myself I was helping everyone. Childless couples got their families, and I thought the money was just compensation for the service, for the emotional support. But I was no longer listening to her justifications. My mind was spiraling through 7 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees I'd bandaged, Christmas mornings, father-daughter dances. Was it all built on a lie? Had my precious Lily been torn from the arms of a mother who believed her baby was dead? The silence stretched between us, broken only by Eleanor's quiet weeping and the rain that continued its relentless drumming against the windows. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but no words came, only questions. Terrible, soul-crushing questions. Father, Eleanor's voice brought me back to the present. What do I do? How do I make this right? I opened my mouth to respond, but found myself speechless. Here was a woman confessing to crimes that had shattered countless lives, including, God help me, possibly my own. The seal of confession bound me to silence, yet how could I remain quiet when innocent families might still be suffering? When somewhere a mother might still be grieving for a child she believed was dead? And what about Lily, my little girl who trusted me completely, who called me Daddy with such pure love? If what Eleanor was telling me was true, then every day I'd been raising her was built on someone else's unimaginable grief. As I sat in that confessional, feeling the weight of sacred duty pressing down upon my shoulders, I realized that what would unfold in the coming days would challenge everything I believed about justice, mercy, and the very nature of my calling as a priest. What happened next would shake our entire community to its core. And the truth about my own family would prove more devastating than anyone could possibly imagine. After Eleanor left that night, I sat alone in the confessional for what felt like hours, though the clock showed only 20 minutes had passed. The weight of her confession pressed against my chest like a stone, making each breath a conscious effort. I found myself whispering the words of Psalm 139, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." But tonight, those familiar words brought no comfort. My journey to priesthood hadn't been a lightning bolt calling like St. Paul on the Damascus Road. Growing up in South Boston, the youngest of 5 children in a family where my father's paycheck barely covered rent, I'd watched my mother find strength in her rosary beads and Sunday Mass. When neighborhood kids were getting into trouble, I found myself drawn to the quiet sanctuary of St. Margaret's, where old Father Murphy would let me help arrange flowers and light candles. The calling came gradually, like dawn breaking over the harbor. During my senior year at Boston College, studying accounting of all things, I felt God's gentle tug toward something greater. My mother cried tears of joy when I announced my decision to enter seminary. "Michael," she said, gripping my hands with fingers worn rough from cleaning offices. "You'll feed souls instead of counting pennies." 25 years later, 15 of them here at St. Rose, I'd learned that feeding souls often meant carrying their burdens. But nothing had prepared me for this. St. Rose Parish had become my second home when I arrived fresh from ordination. Milford was a town where everyone knew their neighbors' middle names and children rode bikes without fear. The church sat on Elm Street like a patient grandmother, her brick walls weathered but strong, her bell tower calling the faithful home each Sunday. Eleanor Harrison had been one of the first parishioners to welcome me. Even then, at 57, she possessed an almost regal presence that commanded respect. Her late husband, Robert, had built a successful construction business before his heart attack claimed him 10 years ago. Eleanor channeled her grief into service, establishing our adoption ministry with the passion of someone who understood loss intimately. She'd lost her own baby 40 years earlier, a daughter who lived only 3 days. Eleanor rarely spoke of it, but I'd seen her sometimes after Sunday service, kneeling before the statue of Mary, her lips moving in silent prayer. Her work with adoption seemed like divine compensation, a way to heal her own wounds while helping others. The families she'd helped create were woven into the fabric of our community. The Thompsons. Mike worked at the fire station. Sarah taught second grade. Their son Ethan was now 5, an energetic boy with Mike's stubborn chin and Sarah's gentle eyes. I'd baptized him, watched him take his first communion steps. The Wilsons had struggled with infertility for 8 years before Eleanor helped them adopt Emma. David and Lisa had nearly given up hope when their daughter arrived like an answered prayer. Emma was now 3, with curly brown hair and a laugh that could light up our entire Sunday school room and my own family. Margaret and I had met 20 years ago at a church social in Hartford. She was working as a parish secretary, her calm efficiency balancing my sometimes scattered pastoral energy. Our courtship unfolded slowly, built on shared faith and quiet conversations about Scripture over coffee. We married believing children would follow naturally, as they had for both our families. 10 years of negative pregnancy tests nearly broke us. Margaret would disappear into our bedroom after each disappointment, and I'd find her hours later, clutching her grandmother's rosary, tears staining her cheeks. We tried fertility treatments that drained our savings and our hope. We'd begun discussing adoption when Eleanor approached us after Sunday service 7 years ago. "Father, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that special tone she used for important matters, "I have wonderful news. A young woman has chosen your family for her baby." The process moved with remarkable speed. Eleanor handled the paperwork, coordinating with lawyers and doctors. Margaret threw herself into preparations, painting the nursery pale yellow, assembling the crib with hands that shook from excitement. When Lily arrived, red-faced and perfect, our broken hearts mended instantly. Now, sitting in my study at 2 a.m., I stared at my daughter's kindergarten drawing taped to my desk. Stick figures labeled Daddy, Mommy, and me, surrounded by purple crayon hearts. The innocence of it shattered something inside me. Margaret had handled all the adoption details. At the time, I'd been grateful for her efficiency, busy with the parish and trusting her completely. But now fragments of memory assembled themselves into a disturbing picture, her insistence on privacy. The way she'd discouraged questions about the birth mother, her nervousness during those final weeks before Lily's arrival. The birth mother preferred anonymity, she'd explained. Eleanor says it's better for everyone this way. I'd accepted it without question. Margaret was thorough about everything. Our taxes, household repairs, vacation planning. Of course, she'd research adoption procedures carefully, but $75,000. Where had that money come from? Our savings account had maybe $12,000 at the time. I'd been so focused on the joy of finally becoming a father that I'd never questioned the financial details. Rising from my desk, I walked to the window overlooking Lily's swing set. Eleanor's words echoed in my memory. Doctors would tell young mothers their babies died during childbirth. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Somewhere, a woman might have grieved for 7 years, believing her daughter was buried in some distant cemetery. never knowing Lily was learning to ride a bicycle in our backyard. I found myself wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. As a priest, I was bound by the sacred seal of confession. Eleanor's words were protected by centuries of canon law and divine commandment. But as a human being, as a father, how could I remain silent while families suffered? Kneeling before the crucifix in my study, I prayed with desperate intensity. Lord, you who sees all hearts, guide me through this darkness. How do I serve you when duty and conscience pull in opposite directions? The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken answers. Over the next 3 days, I found myself studying the families Eleanor had mentioned with new eyes. The Thompsons at Sunday service, little Ethan fidgeting between his parents. Did they know? Had they participated willingly in Eleanor's scheme, or were they victims too? The love in their eyes when they looked at their son appeared genuine, but doubt had poisoned my perception of everything. Eleanor herself seemed to age years in those 3 days. She arrived early for daily mass, her usual confident posture replaced by a hunched frailty that spoke of more than physical illness. Our eyes met across the sanctuary, and I saw in them a plea for forgiveness that I wasn't sure I could offer. The weight of knowledge was transforming me in ways I'd never anticipated. Every sermon felt hollow, every blessing incomplete. How could I preach about God's love while harboring secrets that might destroy my congregation's faith? But what came next would force me to confront an even more devastating truth, one that would make Eleanor's confession seem like merely the first tremor before an earthquake that would shake the very foundations of everything I believed about my calling, my family, and myself. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually filled me with gratitude for God's creation. But as I prepared for the 10 a.m. service, my hands trembled while adjusting my vestments. Everything I'd taken for granted about my congregation now felt like walking through a minefield of hidden truths. The sanctuary filled with familiar faces, families I'd baptized, married, and counseled through life's struggles. But now I found myself studying them with detective's eyes, searching for clues I'd previously missed. The Thompsons sat in their usual third pew, little Ethan swinging his legs while Mike's arm circled Sarah's shoulders. The Wilsons occupied the front row, 3-year-old Emma coloring quietly in her children's Bible. And there, just 2 rows behind my own family, sat a couple I'd noticed for the first time 3 weeks ago. David and Anna Collins had moved to Milford from somewhere in Pennsylvania. David worked as an engineer at the manufacturing plant outside town, while Anna had taken a part-time position at our public library. They appeared to be in their early 30s, well-dressed but not wealthy, carrying themselves with the careful politeness of people still finding their place in a new community. But it was Anna who captured my attention during the opening hymn. As the congregation sang Amazing Grace, I watched her face crumple with emotion that seemed far deeper than typical Sunday worship. Her husband's hand found hers, squeezing gently, and I glimpsed something raw in their shared glance, the look of people carrying invisible wounds. My sermon that morning focused on Luke 8:17. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. The words felt like ashes in my mouth as I spoke them, knowing I harbored secrets that could shatter multiple families. Several times my eyes met Eleanor's in the congregation. She sat alone in the back pew, her usual front row seat abandoned, her face pale as parchment. After service, during the coffee fellowship in our parish hall, I made it my business to approach the Collins family. David, Anna, I extended my hand warmly, I don't think we've had a proper conversation since you joined us. How are you settling into Milford? David's smile seemed genuine but guarded. Everyone's been very welcoming, Father. It's a wonderful community. Anna nodded, but I noticed how her gaze drifted toward the children playing in the corner, particularly toward little Emma Wilson, whose curly brown hair caught the morning light streaming through the hall windows. Do you have children? I asked gently, immediately regretting the question when I saw Anna's face crumble slightly. We lost our daughter, David said quietly, his arm moving protectively around his wife's shoulders. 7 years ago. Complications during birth. My blood turned cold. 7 years ago. The same time frame as Lily's adoption. I'm so sorry for your loss, I managed, my pastoral instincts warring with the terrible suspicion growing in my mind. That must have been devastating. We thought we were ready for a fresh start, Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. But some wounds never really heal, do they, Father? As she spoke, little Emma Wilson ran past us, chasing after a dropped crayon. Anna's breath caught audibly, and I saw her hand reach out involuntarily, as if to touch the child's hair. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable. The same heart-shaped face, the same delicate bone structure, even the same way of tilting her head when concentrating. "Anna?" David's voice carried concern as he noticed his wife's reaction. "Sorry," she whispered. She reminds me of—" The conversation ended awkwardly, but my mind was racing. Another young couple. Another baby supposedly lost during birth. Another timeline that matched Eleanor's confession perfectly. That afternoon I found myself in my study with a legal pad, writing down everything I could remember about the families Eleanor had mentioned. The Thompsons, the Wilsons, my own family, and now, potentially, the Collins family, though they hadn't been on Eleanor's list. How many more families were there? How many grieving parents had been told their children were dead while those same children grew up in other homes? The cruel mathematics of it overwhelmed me. If Eleanor's scheme had operated for years, the number of affected families could be staggering. Each adoption represented not just a crime, but a double tragedy. Children stolen from their birth families and unknowingly raised by people who believed they were participating in legitimate adoptions. I thought of the physical similarities I'd started noticing. Ethan Thompson had his adoptive father's sturdy build, but his eyes were distinctly different, a deep brown that neither Mike nor Sarah possessed. Emma Wilson's delicate features seemed at odds with her parents' more angular faces. And Lily. My beautiful Lily, with her green eyes and freckled nose that looked nothing like Margaret's blue eyes or my own dark coloring. The observations that had once seemed like interesting quirks of genetics now felt like evidence of something far more sinister. Tuesday evening brought our weekly Bible study, and I chose to focus on the story of King Solomon and the two women claiming the same baby. As I read from 1 Kings 3:16 to 28, the parallel to our situation felt almost prophetic. Then the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other." Eleanor attended the study, as she had for years, but sat in the back corner, rarely participating in our discussions. When we reached the part about the true mother's willingness to give up her child rather than see it harmed, I saw tears streaming down her face. After the others left, Eleanor approached me hesitantly. "Father, that story about the mothers—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "What about it, Eleanor?" The real mother loved her child enough to let go. But what if someone took that choice away? What if mothers never got the chance to prove their love? The question hung between us like incense, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to comfort her, to offer the forgiveness she so desperately sought, but my own heart was too broken to speak healing words. "Eleanor," I said carefully, "if someone had made terrible mistakes, what would you advise them to do?" She studied my face for a long moment. I suppose they'd need to trust that God's justice is tempered with mercy. But, Father— Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if making things right means destroying innocent people's lives? What if the cure is worse than the disease?" I had no answer for her, because the same question had been tormenting me for days. Wednesday afternoon, I was visiting Mrs. Patterson in the hospital when I encountered Dr. Harrison Hartwell in the corridor. Dr. Hartwell had been practicing obstetrics in Milford for over 20 years and had delivered many of our parish babies. He was also, I realized with growing dread, the same doctor who had supposedly delivered Lily 7 years ago. "Father O'Connor," he greeted me with his usual professional warmth. "How's that beautiful daughter of yours? Lily must be in 2nd grade now." "She is," I replied, studying his face carefully. "Dr. Hartwell, I've been thinking about the day she was born. Such a remarkable coincidence that the birth mother chose our family." Something flickered in his eyes, so briefly I might have imagined it. Yes, well, these things have a way of working out according to God's plan, don't they? "Indeed they do," I agreed, but his discomfort was palpable. "I sometimes wonder about her birth mother. Margaret handled all the details, but I've always felt grateful to the young woman who made such a selfless choice." Dr. Hartwell's smile became forced. "I'm sure she found peace in her decision, Father. If you'll excuse me, I have patients to see." As he hurried away, I noticed his hands shaking slightly. Another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation that Eleanor's confession was just the tip of an iceberg that threatened to sink our entire community. That night, I knelt in the empty sanctuary until my knees ached, praying for wisdom I wasn't sure existed. The stained glass windows cast colored shadows across the altar, and I found myself thinking about light and darkness, truth and deception, the terrible cost of secrets. But what I discovered next would prove that the web of lies was even more intricate than I'd imagined, and the revelation waiting for me would challenge everything I thought I knew about the people I'd trusted most, including the woman I'd pledged to love and honor until death do us part. Tuesday morning brought news that shattered my last hope for a peaceful resolution. Dr. Hartwell's nurse called the parish office, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Father O'Connor, you need to know something about Mrs. Jennifer Martinez. She's pregnant, due next month, and Dr. Hartwell has been asking unusual questions about her family situation." My blood turned to ice. Jennifer Martinez was a young woman from our parish, unmarried, struggling financially, living with her elderly grandmother. If Eleanor's network was still operating, if Dr. Hartwell was still part of the scheme, what kind of questions? I managed to ask. About her support system, her financial resources, whether she'd considered adoption. But Father, the way he's been pushing the topic and some conversations I overheard, she paused, clearly struggling with professional loyalty versus moral obligation. I think something terrible might happen to her baby. I thanked her and immediately drove to the Martinez home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Jennifer answered the door, her pregnancy clearly in its final weeks, her face carrying the exhaustion of someone carrying burdens too heavy for her 19 years. "Father O'Connor." She smiled despite her obvious fatigue. "What brings you here? Jennifer, how are you feeling about the upcoming birth? Do you have all the support you need?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Actually, Dr. Hartwell has been very helpful. He's arranged for some counselors to talk with me about options. They say there are families who could provide opportunities I never could." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The same pattern, the same players, another vulnerable young woman being manipulated into surrendering her child to Eleanor's network. "Jennifer," I said carefully, "have you considered getting a second medical opinion? Sometimes it's good to have multiple perspectives. Dr. Hartwell says that might confuse things. He's been very kind, offering to handle all the arrangements personally." I left her house knowing that within weeks another family would be told their baby had died, while Jennifer's child disappeared into the adoption pipeline. The cycle was continuing, and my silence was making me complicit in future crimes. That afternoon brought even worse news. Anna Collins called, her voice electric with excitement and terror. "Father, you'll never believe what happened. I hired that private investigator like you suggested, and he found something. Hospital records from 7 years ago don't match what we were told. There's evidence that multiple babies who supposedly died actually—" She paused, breathing heavily. "Father, I think my daughter might be alive. I think she might be right here in Milford." The walls of my office seemed to close in around me. "Anna, that's remarkable news. The investigator is meeting with the police tomorrow. He says there's evidence of a systematic scheme involving falsified death certificates and illegal adoptions." "Father, what if other families in our parish are involved? What if some of these children I see every Sunday?" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The truth was surfacing with or without my intervention, like a body rising from the depths of a lake. Wednesday evening, I knelt alone in the sanctuary as darkness fell around me. The weight of impossible choices had left me physically ill. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. The statue of Christ on the cross seemed to gaze down at me with eyes full of understanding for impossible suffering. "Lord," I whispered into the silence, "you faced the choice between law and love, between tradition and truth. Show me the path that honors both your justice and your mercy." The silence that followed felt different somehow, not empty, but pregnant with possibility. As I knelt there, passages from Scripture began flowing through my mind with unusual clarity. Jesus overturning the money changers' tables, Moses breaking the stone tablets when he found the Israelites worshiping false gods, Solomon threatening to divide the baby to reveal the true mother. Sometimes divine justice required breaking human rules. Thursday morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Police Detective Maria Santos introduced herself and requested a meeting. "Father O'Connor, we're investigating irregularities in several adoptions processed through your parish's ministry. We have reason to believe that multiple families have been victims of fraud and that several children are living with families who may not be their legal guardians." My hands gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. "Detective, how can I help you?" "We need to interview Eleanor Harrison, but she's refusing to cooperate and demanding to speak only with you. Her doctor says she has days, maybe hours left. If she has information that could help us locate missing children or reunite families." The detective's words faded as I realized the moment of absolute choice had arrived. Eleanor was dying, the police were investigating, and innocent families were about to be destroyed by revelations they never saw coming. I could maintain my silence and let chaos unfold randomly, or I could find a way to guide the truth toward mercy. That evening, I sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed as machines monitored her failing body. Her eyes were lucid despite the pain medication, and she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Father, the police know. About the adoptions, about the money, about everything. They have Jennifer Martinez under protective custody." She coughed weakly. "It's over." "Eleanor, this is your chance to make things right, to guide how the truth comes out, instead of letting it explode like a bomb." She shook her head. "I can't face those families. The Thompsons, the Wilsons, your family. How do I tell parents that the children they love were stolen? How do I tell other parents that the babies they've mourned for years are sleeping in bedrooms across town?" "You tell them with love," I said softly. "You trust that families built on love can survive the truth, and that healing begins with honesty." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Will you be there when I tell them? Will you help me find the words?" I thought of Jennifer Martinez, safe now but traumatized by learning how close she'd come to losing her baby. I thought of little Ethan Thompson, still fighting for his life while his biological parents remained unaware of his existence. I thought of Anna Collins searching desperately for a daughter who lived just blocks away. And I thought of my own Lily, innocent and beloved, whose entire world was about to change. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll be there." As I left the hospital that night, I knew that what would happen over the next 48 hours would either destroy our community entirely or transform it into something stronger than we'd ever imagined. And the revelation I was about to make about my own family would prove that sometimes the most devastating truths come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn air that usually reminded me of God's perfect artistry. Instead, I woke with the knowledge that this day would shatter the peaceful facade our community had maintained for years. Eleanor had passed away during the night, but not before leaving a detailed confession with the police and a heartbreaking letter requesting that I help guide the families through what was to come. Detective Santos called at 7 a.m. "Father O'Connor, we need you at the station. Mrs. Harrison's confession has given us enough evidence to move forward, and we'll need your help contacting the affected families." The police station felt surreal, A place where I'd only come for community events and blessing ceremonies, now the epicenter of our town's greatest crisis. Eleanor's written confession lay spread across Detective Santos's desk, 23 pages documenting 15 years of systematic baby trafficking, complete with names, dates, and financial records. "Father," Detective Santos said gently, "there are 12 families directly affected, children who were told their birth parents were dead, parents who were told their babies died. We need to handle this carefully. Some of these kids are old enough to understand what's happening." My hands trembled as I reviewed the list. The names read like a roster of my congregation: Thompson, Wilson, Rodriguez, Clark, Martinez, Patel, and there, near the bottom, O'Connor. "We'll need DNA tests to confirm relationships," Detective Santos continued. "But based on Mrs. Harrison's records and the birth dates, we're confident about the matches. The question is how to reunite these families without traumatizing the children." By noon, news of Eleanor's confession had leaked to the local media. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, concerned parishioners, and the affected families themselves. I found myself becoming a crisis counselor for situations I'd never imagined facing. The first family to arrive at the parish was the Hendersons, Ethan Thompson's biological parents. They'd driven 3 hours from Springfield after Detective Santos contacted them with news that their son, supposedly dead for 5 years, was alive and living in our community. Carol Henderson collapsed in my office chair, sobbing with a mixture of joy and rage that shook her entire body. "5 years, Father. 5 years we visited a grave that held nothing but lies while our baby was growing up 10 miles away." Her husband Jim paced the room like a caged animal. How do we approach him? How do we tell Mike and Sarah Thompson that their son belongs to us? How do we destroy a family to rebuild our own? Before I could answer, the Thompsons themselves arrived, having heard the news through the police notification system. The scene that unfolded in my office will haunt me forever. Sarah Thompson faced Carol Henderson across my small room, both women united in their love for the same child. Mike Thompson shook hands with Jim Henderson with the bewildered politeness of men trying to process the impossible. And somewhere across town, 5-year-old Ethan was at kindergarten, blissfully unaware that his entire world was being redefined. "We need to think about what's best for Ethan," Sarah said through her tears. "He's been our son for 5 years. You gave birth to him, but we've raised him." "We grieved for him," Carol replied, her voice breaking. "We held a funeral for an empty casket. We've carried the pain of his loss every single day." The conversation continued for hours, with both families gradually understanding that their situation required wisdom beyond human comprehension. Finally, Sarah made a suggestion that stunned everyone. "What if we raise him together? What if we become an extended family instead of fighting over custody?" Similar scenes played out throughout the weekend as families learned the truth. The Wilsons met 3-year-old Emma's biological parents, the Garcias, who had moved to California believing their daughter was dead. The Rodriguez family discovered their adopted son Carlos had birth parents living just 2 towns away. Sunday service became an emergency congregation meeting, the sanctuary filled beyond capacity as word spread throughout Milford. Families affected by Eleanor's scheme sat in different sections, some clutching children who looked confused by the adult tears around them. I approached the pulpit knowing that my next words would either unite our community or fracture it permanently. "My brothers and sisters in Christ," I began, my voice somehow steady despite the storm in my heart. "We gather today not to judge, but to heal, not to assign blame, but to find a path forward rooted in love." I shared Eleanor's final letter, which asked for forgiveness and expressed her hope that the families would find a way to honor the love that had grown in both biological and adoptive homes. Her words carried the weight of genuine repentance, though they couldn't undo years of deception. "Eleanor made terrible choices," I continued, "but the love these children have received in their adoptive homes is real. The grief their biological parents have carried is real. The healing that must happen now is also real, and it will require all of us to choose love over anger, hope over despair." As I spoke, I watched the faces in the congregation transform. Initial shock and anger gradually gave way to something deeper, a recognition that our community's greatest crisis might also become its greatest opportunity for grace. After the service, something remarkable began happening. Families started talking to each other. The Thompsons invited the Hendersons to dinner to discuss Ethan's future. The Wilsons offered to let the Garcias visit Emma regularly until permanent arrangements could be made. Parents who had lost children found comfort in parents who had gained them under false pretenses. But the most profound moment came when Anna Collins approached Margaret and me in the church vestibule. "Father," she said, her voice steady despite obvious emotion, "I've seen the police reports. I know about Lily." Margaret's face went white, and I felt my knees nearly buckle. Anna continued, "I wanted to meet the people who loved my daughter when I couldn't. I wanted to thank you for giving her a home filled with faith and kindness." Margaret began sobbing, and Anna, this woman whose child we'd unknowingly raised for 7 years, reached out and embraced her. "We're going to figure this out together," Anna whispered. "All of us, for Lily's sake." As the three of us stood there in that holy embrace, I realized that God had been orchestrating redemption even through human evil. The web of lies was becoming a tapestry of connection. Pain was transforming into purpose, and our broken community was discovering strength it never knew it possessed. But what happened next would prove that even the most devastating revelations can become the foundation for miracles that nobody, not the families, not the community, not even I, could have possibly imagined. 1 year later, I stood at the altar of St. Rose Parish on a crisp December morning, preparing to officiate a ceremony unlike any in our church's history. The sanctuary was filled with 12 families whose lives had been forever intertwined by Eleanor's deception, yet transformed by their collective choice to pursue healing over hatred. The legal battles had concluded months earlier. Most children remained with their adoptive families, but now with open relationships to their biological parents. Custody arrangements varied. Some families chose shared holidays, others arranged regular visits, and a few decided on joint custody. What surprised everyone, including the family court judge, was how rarely these decisions required legal intervention. Love, it seemed, had its own wisdom. Ethan Thompson, now 6 and healthy thanks to genetic information provided by the Hendersons, sat between both sets of parents in the front pew. He'd adapted to having 2 mommies and 2 daddies, with the remarkable resilience children possess. The Hendersons had relocated to Milford, and the 2 families had become so close that they'd purchased homes on the same street. "It's not traditional," Carol Henderson had told me during one of our counseling sessions, but God's plans rarely follow human expectations. 3-year-old Emma Wilson giggled quietly as her biological mother, Maria Garcia, showed her pictures on a tablet. The Garcias had moved back from California, and both families were planning to raise Emma together. "She's doubled our family instead of dividing it," Lisa Wilson had remarked with tears of gratitude. And there in the 3rd pew sat my own transformed family. Lily, now 8, beamed between Margaret and Anna Collins, whom she'd begun calling Mama Anna. David Collins had become like a brother to me, and our family spent most Sundays together. The DNA test had confirmed what our hearts already knew, but rather than tear us apart, the truth had created something beautiful and unprecedented. "I gained a daughter I thought I'd lost," Anna had said during her testimony at Eleanor's sentencing hearing, "and I gained friends who loved her when I couldn't. That's not tragedy, that's miracle." Eleanor had survived her initial prognosis by 8 months, living long enough to witness the healing she'd helped facilitate through her confession. She'd spent her final months in a hospice facility, receiving visits from many of the families she'd wronged. Her final act had been donating her entire estate to create a support fund for families affected by adoption fraud. "Father," she'd whispered during our last conversation, "do you think God can forgive someone like me?" "Eleanor," I'd replied, "God specializes in turning crucifixions into resurrections. Your greatest sin became the catalyst for our community's greatest miracle." The ceremony I was about to perform had been Lily's idea. She'd asked why we couldn't have a special church service to celebrate all the families that God made from the broken pieces, out of the mouths of babes. "Dearly beloved," I began, my voice carrying across the packed sanctuary, "we gather today not to dedicate a building or celebrate a holiday, but to consecrate something far more precious, the bonds of love that transcend blood, law, and human understanding." The service included testimonies from each affected family. Mike Thompson spoke about learning that parenthood isn't about genetics, but about the daily choice to love unconditionally. Maria Garcia shared how she'd discovered that mourning and joy could coexist in the same heart. Margaret stood and thanked Anna Collins for giving me the privilege of raising your daughter while you couldn't. But it was Anna's testimony that moved everyone to tears. "A year ago, I thought I was searching for my lost daughter," she said, her voice strong despite her emotion. "I discovered I was actually being led to a larger family than I'd ever imagined. Lily didn't just gain her birth parents back, we all gained each other." The transformation extended beyond the directly affected families. Our parish had become a model for crisis response, with delegations visiting from other communities facing similar revelations. Dr. Hartwell had served 6 months in prison and now worked as a volunteer counselor for adoption fraud victims. The hospital had implemented new protocols, and our state had strengthened adoption oversight laws. Most remarkably, our congregation had grown by 30% as word spread about how we'd handled the crisis. People were drawn to a community that had chosen healing over hatred, restoration over revenge. During the benediction, I looked out at faces that had been transformed by trials none of us had expected. The Hendersons and Thompsons were planning a joint vacation. The Wilsons and Garcias had started a support group for blended families. Anna and David Collins had become my closest friends and Lily's second set of parents. "Lord," I prayed aloud, "you have shown us that your greatest miracles often come disguised as our worst disasters. Help us remember that love multiplies rather than divides, and that families built on faith can weather any storm." As the service concluded, I watched Lily run between both sets of parents, her laughter echoing through the sanctuary. This child, who might have been the victim of our community's greatest tragedy, had instead become the symbol of its greatest triumph. That evening, as I sat in my study preparing next Sunday's sermon, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. A year ago, I'd believed my greatest challenge was maintaining the sacred seal of confession. I'd learned instead that my true calling was helping others discover that God's love is large enough to transform even our most devastating mistakes into miraculous blessings. The phone rang. Detective Santos calling to update me on a similar case in a neighboring county. "Father, they've asked if you could help facilitate family meetings. After seeing what happened in Milford, they want to follow your model." I smiled, understanding that our story was becoming a testimony to communities far beyond our own. From Eleanor's deathbed confession had grown a ministry of healing that was spreading across the state. As I prepared for bed, I stopped by Lily's room. She was fast asleep, surrounded by drawings she'd made of her big family. Stick figures labeled with names representing the dozens of people who now called her daughter, sister, granddaughter, or friend. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered into the darkness, "for teaching us that your definition of family is far more generous than ours, and that even the deepest wounds can become doorways to the most extraordinary grace." Outside, snow began falling on the quiet streets of Milford, covering our town like a blessing. In houses throughout our community, children who'd been stolen were sleeping peacefully in beds surrounded by twice the love they might have known otherwise. Parents who'd been separated by lies now shared the joy of raising children they'd never expected to find. Eleanor's scheme had been designed to destroy families. Instead, God had used it to create something unprecedented, a community where love proved stronger than deception, where truth brought freedom rather than devastation, and where the very bonds meant to be broken had become unbreakable through divine grace. Sometimes the Lord truly does right straight with crooked lines.